Welcome to our webinar on DEM extraction and mining applications. We are joined today by a special guest from CGG, which is a engineering company, global engineering company, specifically a group within that company called NPA Satellite Mapping that has been producing wonderful services based on satellite remote sensing for a number of years. And we'll be introducing our guest speaker in a minute here. Just a quick few words on logistics. So everyone is muted currently. That's so that you can keep typing and doing work, or if you have multiple people in the room, you can certainly talk about the content that you're seeing. You won't be interrupting the presenters at all, so go ahead and do that. You can ask questions at any time. There's a questions panel available in the GoToWebinar interface. So be sure to ask your questions throughout the session. Don't wait until the end. And we do have people monitoring the Q&A during the session. If you have a problem or if you want to speak during the live Q&A, you can raise your hand. And also we are recording this, so please make sure to stick around if you want to see the live version. If you want to come back and review certain parts of the demonstrations or the discussion that we have today, you can certainly do that. We will be sending a link around once we complete the webinar. So just really quickly on the presenters. So on the left, myself, Kevin Jones, I'm the Director of Marketing at PCI Geomatics. I have about 20 years of experience in the remote sensing industry, both on the data provider side of things, having started my career with MDA in Vancouver, Canada, and now having worked with PCI for a number of years. So I have experience on both application development from the data provider side of things, as well as the software and the tool makers, having now worked with PCI for a number of years. Charlotte Bishop is a project manager on the remote sensing side with NPA Satellite Mapping. NPA Satellite Mapping, those of you who may recall, is a company that has been around for a number of years and started, I think, somewhere around 20 years ago, and is now part of CGG, which is a larger environmental or engineering firm that has a global presence. So Charlotte is actually going to be presenting a case study on DEM extraction from PCI technology that's used for mining applications, specifically in Mali. So before we start into the formal part of the presentation, we like to understand who's here and what your interest is. So I'm going to launch a quick poll here. We'll get this done nice and quick. So we'd like to know, first of all, what type of imagery you're working with currently. This helps us to understand the type of data you work with and what potentially can be done in terms of software and applications as well. As you'll see in Charlotte's presentation, she will be talking about different types of data and the limitations of the different resolution in terms of the application. So we'd like to get a sense of what type of data you're using. If you are using other data, you can use the questions panel to just type in maybe the other type of imagery that you're working with. We try to reflect the current high-resolution data sets that are available at the moment, but of course the list is a lot longer than this. So if you're using other types of data, we'd love to hear about it. So I'm going to close that down in 3 seconds. So 3, 2, 1. Thanks very much for everyone who voted. I'm going to quickly show you the results here. So you can see that Worldview seems to be the winner. Pleiades Spot, so the Airbus series of sensors are used quite a bit. ComSat a little bit less. A lot of you are using UAV, and it looks like a large number of you are using something other. So just thought I would share that with you so you can see what the audience is currently using. Great. Okay, so quickly let's go over PCI Geomatics, just quickly introduce the company here. We are essentially a software company that has been in business for over 34 years now, and we make a number of software tools that really help our customers get more from imagery. We have a number of offerings. What you see here on the screen is our desktop offering on the left and our large volume, high volume production system known as GXL on the right. And in the middle you see a Python icon, because essentially we make use of Python throughout our software platform to allow you to automate different tasks. So every single one of the algorithms that is available through Geomatica or GXL can be called and scripted and automated into a workflow. So that allows you to produce operational efficiencies as you go from the left to the right, and you can certainly scale the system up and down depending on what you're working on. This is just an example of a custom workflow that can be developed. In this case, we're showing a custom workflow that's been developed with ArcGIS. So ArcGIS is just an example. You could certainly develop a workflow with open source technology or with other type of software. We show ArcGIS because they also have a Python API, which lends itself quite well to developing a complete workflow with both Geomatica and ArcGIS. In this case, we use the best of both software packages, so DEM extraction from Geomatica, and then we have some volumetric calculations that are done in ArcGIS. The technology can be deployed on desktops or servers or even on the cloud. It's very, very flexible in terms of what can be done. Geomatica is available on both Windows and Linux platforms. And speaking of platform, as I mentioned, Geomatica is quite an advanced and mature software product that has been developed for over 34 years. We have currently over 550 algorithms that can be called from Python. Those can then be integrated with third-party tools, and if you add expert knowledge to that, you could build a specific custom solution for your particular market. So for DEM and mining, you could actually take some technology from us and implement that throughout the in your specific workflow. Okay, and I'm just quickly going to show you now. So today's presentation is about DEMs and extracting DEMs for mining applications. So I want to quickly show you how easy it is to essentially start a project from scratch and implement a project using OrthoEngine. So if I open up Geomatica, I'm just going to load up the Geomatica tool here, and I'll just close the viewer down for a second. You can see that Geomatica, our current version is Geomatica 2016, which was released earlier this year. We have a number of tools. Focus is our viewer. OrthoEngine is the main workhorse for doing things like extracting DEMs, producing orthos, and generating mosaics. So what I've done is I've launched OrthoEngine here. And if I just show you the input data that I was working with, so this is the raw data that was delivered from WorldView, and these two XML files here represent two images that were collected in stereo from WorldView. So if I just load up Focus really quickly here, and I'll show you those two images. So I can very easily drag and drop those two XML files and load the data into Focus. I'll zoom out to an overview here, and I could just flicker between the two images and show you that these are stereo images that were collected on the same day, a long track, so stereo, a long track image pair. So these are two panchromatic images collected at, I believe it's down to 35 centimeters at this point. So that's the raw data that we're working with. So in OrthoEngine, we simply start a new project, which I've already done here. We can add the data. So I just pointed to those XML files, and I was able to add those two scenes very quickly. The next step would be simply to do a model calculation to perform a bundle adjustment. So we use, in PCI technology, we use the ephemeris information that's made available by the different data vendors, in this case Digital Globe, to calculate a very precise sensor model for that particular sensor. So we're able to perform a model calculation, And then we go to our DEM from stereo step. First step is to create an epipolar pair. So we have, in this case, 2 images. So we have our August 10th image number 1 and August 10th image number 2. We essentially add those two to the epipolar, and then we generate the pairs. That, depending on the speed of the system or the performance of the system, can take anywhere from a few minutes to maybe 10 minutes or so. I'm running on a laptop here, and that step took maybe 5 minutes. Then once we have our epipolars, we can go directly to the extracting the DEM from the epipolar pairs. So here we can create a geocoded DEM. We can specify the file name, we can choose the resolution, and essentially we have a number of options available. We can help the system detect or improve the quality of the results by changing some of the parameters here. I won't go through them in detail, but essentially the system allows you to customize the DEM to be extracted based on the particulars of that geography. So I'd like to just quickly show you a few results from that. I will again load focus here, and I'll just load up a few different examples here. So the DEM which I extracted is available here, so I'll load that. This is extracted at 1 meter resolution. So we have the overview window here, we have our DEM. Now the nice thing about our DEM extraction, not only in terms of the results, but we have this wonderful panel here called DEM Editing. So as soon as I launch that, you'll see that we have this nice shaded color-coded view of the DEM, which is very intuitive. We can see the different elevation heights that are color-coded, and we can get a sense of the topography from the DEM. We have this toggle button here. We can go from the DEM to the imagery, so we can quickly understand what the features are underneath. So this is, in this case, this is the panchromatic band from one of the 2 images that is stored with the DEM. And then we have some nice little tools. So, for example, depending on the features or the contrast, we may have some areas that fail in terms of the DEM extraction. So I'm just going to quickly, this looks like a water body here where we have some bad elevations. So I can very easily create a new layer. I can draw a quick outline over that problem area. And then we have a number of filters. So I'll just choose a filter from the vertices. I'll choose a blend width of maybe 10 pixels, and I can apply that. And you can see that if I turn that on and off, whoops, if I turn that cut line on and off, then obviously I put maybe a little bit too much blend here, so I can just very easily undo that, change my blend width to a smaller number, and make my edits. So some nice tools. Charlotte's going to be talking a lot more about this and how they use it for cleaning their DEMs, and then she'll get into the application side of things as well. So that's all I wanted to show, just give you a sense of how easy it is to generate elevation models using stereo data in PCI's technology. And before we move over to Charlotte, I wanted to do another quick poll, which is essentially we'd like to know what software you're currently using for image analysis. So perhaps you're already using Geomatica, maybe using a combination of Geomatica and ERDAS and NV, maybe using open source. If you are using other technology, which we haven't listed here, we'd love to hear what else it is that you're using. Really the goal of this webinar is to raise awareness in terms of what technology we have available, but also from a software tool maker, we'd like to know perhaps where our technology isn't meeting your expectations so that we can improve it. It's great. A lot of people are providing your input here. Really appreciate that. And once again, if you are using something else and you want to let us know what that is, just use the questions panel to fill in the details. So I'm just going to leave that open for another 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much. And at this point, I'm going to change the presentation over, pass over the control to Charlotte, who will be walking you through the case study over Mali. So I will just wait a few moments here while Charlotte gets set up, and I'll unmute your mic. Sorry about that, Charlotte. Here, you're unmuted now.
Okay. Can you see my screen okay, Kevin?
Yes, we can. Absolutely. You just go into presentation mode there and you're all set. Perfect.
Excellent. Thank you very much for the introduction, Kevin. Good afternoon and good morning to everyone who's joined us from various locations, as Kevin says. My presentation, the title is perhaps slightly different to how it was billed, only because I wanted to also include some other more broader geological applications, not just for mining, although the case study itself remains a mining case study that I'll be presenting. So to give a bit of an introduction, I've noticed from Kevin's presentation there is a slight delay in the slides, so do bear with me if it's taking a while to load whilst I'm talking. If you're not already seeing a slide, you should soon be seeing a slide that's entitled NPA Satellite Mapping. So to give a bit of background on NPA and to perhaps slightly update some of the things that Kevin said, we've actually been around since 1972, initially incorporated as an independent company. We were subsequently purchased by Fugro, who are a geotechnical company, in 2008. And then more recently purchased by CGG, who are a seismic acquisition and processing company. Some may be aware of them as CGG Veritas. If you're more on the oil and gas side, I'm sure will be more familiar with CGG. So CGG as a whole is predominantly exploration, oil and gas focused. However, the work that NPA does certainly isn't just focused on oil and gas. We've been working in that arena as well as in mining, engineering, defence and environment for the entirety of our history, and exploiting the range of different data sources that are available. So we're an independent data supplier. We don't have any direct affiliation with the specific satellite, but we are a distributor or a reseller for all commercially available satellite sources. So those will be the more standard data sets that some of you may be familiar with, such as those from Digital Globe and Airbus, but also those perhaps less common data sets from the Korean satellite offerings, as well as those from China, Japan, and elsewhere. And we use both optical and radar, and of course elevation models, which is the title of this presentation. So we work in both the onshore and offshore, and I'll just touch on some examples in the next 2 slides on what those solutions look like in terms of what we offer in those areas. So on the slide that should be appearing shortly, you'll see a series of pictures which outline some of the offshore services. Predominantly our offshore services are perhaps largely more focused on oil and gas, but just as an overview for the company, I thought it was useful to include. So we have a very large offshore seepage database, which includes oil slicks, which are mainly natural pollution slicks, natural slicks as well as pollution slicks, and these are collated from an extensive database of about 28,000 interpreted radar scenes, which meet specific weather requirements to be able to interpret these features. The image on the very right-hand side of your screen, which has a number of different colours, just highlights some of the historical repeating slicks that we can obtain over some areas. And we can build up this stack of changes in a time series to provide prospecting information, as well as ongoing monitoring over an area related to a rig or pipeline or other feature. We also do ice mapping, sometimes that involves ice charting, sometimes it's iceberg tracking, and that can also be linked in with AIS data for pollution monitoring as well, both in that region as well as in other areas of the world. And lastly, on the offshore side, we also are able to extract shallow water bathymetry. Obviously, there are a number of caveats in how that's possible to do, and I'm not going to focus on the bathymetric side of elevation today, but if anyone has any questions on that or wants to know more, please feel free to email me. On the onshore side, hopefully you can see a slide that's coming up now. A couple of these things I'll be talking about in more detail later, but a large core of the business that we do here is focused on geological mapping and has been for since the launch of Landsat, which was when the company was incorporated in 1972. And as part of that, and the range of different resolution scales that we do that type of work, we can also do 3D modeling, which I'll discuss later. We can also use satellite radar data for surface deformation mapping, down to millimetric or centimetric, depending on the technique, level of accuracy in terms of ground motion of both subsidence and uplift. I don't talk about that side of, I guess, topographic changes today, but again, those types of features I'm happy to follow up on. And then subsequently, we can add lots of these layers together as part of terrain characterization assessments, which can support pipelines as well as access into an area which can be useful for mining and other logistical activities. So just a couple of, or I guess an introduction slide to high-resolution DEMs. Hopefully on the screen you'll see a list of satellites and what looks like a very, very pixelated DEM. That is not a high-resolution DEM, for those who are concerned. So the list on the left, and some of these I believe have already been touched on with the poll that Kevin very helpfully did earlier. So Pleiad is the satellite we're going to talk about specifically today. It was the basis of the work that I'll be presenting, but of course there are now a number of options that can provide elevation data down to even kind of 0.3 at a kind of 1-to-1 resolution with the new WorldView 3 data. ComSat 3 is a very, very good data source. I noticed it wasn't being used very, very much in terms of a stereo source of imagery at the moment, but the quality of the data is extremely good, and we've had some very good results. And likewise, DEMOS 2 has a lot of promise for very good quality stereo. Slightly at the lower end of the high resolution DEM, around a meter or 1.5 meters is probably its more suitable grid posting range, but it does provide another alternative. So back to the very pixelated DEM that you're looking at. This is a very flat area in Central Asia. What you're looking at is SRTM. So in this case, we're just looking at 90-meter data. I'm then going to overlay it with some Pleiad DEM, which we extracted a few years ago for a project. In this area, the elevation range is only about 4 meters. But even with that very limited range of elevation, we can still see a considerable amount of detail, and hopefully that is slowly coming onto your screens now. This is a very active area in exploration. There are a number of well pads and roads that you might be able to clearly see, as well as the river features. So whilst we don't necessarily have the very high detail of a LiDAR posted DEM, a high-resolution satellite DEM can provide a cost-effective and perhaps, in some cases, equivalent in terms of detail, even if not in terms of accuracy result. So the area we're going to look at, as Kevin says, is in Mali. This is for a mining client, Endeavour Mining. You'll see the logo at the bottom of the screen. They have been a client of ours for a number of years now, across a number of their African mining sites. We've done similar work also in Burkina Faso with WorldView 2, but I'm going to focus on the more recent work we've done for them over their Tabakoto mine in Mali. So the block that they have here, the Tabakoto mine, has been operating since 2009. It's wholly owned by Endeavour Mining, although there is some Mali government input into the area as well. It's a gold mine, of which there are a series of open pit as well as underground mines in the area. The purpose of what they're trying to do is just to understand, as part of further exploration of this license, to get a better idea of how the area's changed, because it's changed quite significantly in the time they've been operating, and to support their survey efforts for expanding the operations and ensuring the limitation of environmental impact. They also actually own the block to the northeast of this area as well, which is called Kofi. That's K-O-F-I. Also gold mining area as well, and we had previously provided a Pleiad extracted DEM for that as well. So this is just, I guess, an extension of that processing. So the area itself is not particularly big, 130 square kilometres, which from a processing perspective makes that very straightforward to process. And unfortunately, it happened to be across two scenes, but again, not too much of a problem, very similar in date. So from a seasonal perspective, there wasn't any implications there. So the two dates we were looking at were February and December 2015, just because those were the dates that were available in archive for the area, and of course it saved a new collection. Sometimes new collections it can take time. You often get quite a lot of haze in this part of Mali as well, and the risk seemed to be too high when there was suitable data that met the client's needs in this case. So the product that we purchased in this case for them was the primary bundle product. The reason for that is that we wanted to take the process from the raw data state itself, and by keeping the data in bundle, we can process the panchromatic data, the black and white data in native, and then subsequently pan sharpen the data. Could have purchased 4-band pan sharpened data, but we prefer to work with the panchromatic directly. So the scope of work I've already kind of hinted is to support mining logistics and survey planning in the area. One of the aims, I've actually put it under the method, was to join the two DEMs together for the two different sites. But I'll mention that later because there were some problems with that just because of the different survey systems in the area. So the general method and process that we followed was to obtain the stereo imagery. In this case, that was quite straightforward because the data is already existing, and then was to generate a digital surface model. So you'll see a digital surface model not of this area on the right hand side. It is actually another area in Mali, and then we're going to filter that area to a terrain model, which you'll see hopefully sliding across your screen very shortly. So removing that tall vegetation, removing some of the kind of scattered low-level housing as well, so they could get a better feel for the bare earth. The lucky thing in this area is the extent of vegetation is reasonably limited. It's largely scattered trees and bushes, which makes it easier to remove those features. As you might have been able to see from that example, and I'll just flick through it again, there are some river channels there which have vegetation within them. That becomes a harder process to remove those without degrading the quality of the river channel, whilst also ensuring that you're not removing any of the topographic features. And then we additionally provided an ortho image and contours as well, so you'll see an ortho image as well that was generated later in the presentation. So how do we do this? Well, we have been using PCI for a very long time now at NPA, but we also use it in combination with our own algorithms as well. We use PCI as the main output, and then run that through some other processing that we have in-house, particularly for the integration of the ground control. Those types of features can be done within PCI, but we have traditionally used a different processing chain which works well, and we prefer to use it in that way. So the general steps are to extract the DEM, of which, if I just start the time series again, sometimes may have artifacts, and you may see that the first tile has some pockets of what appears to be errors. These are cloud errors in this case. So we can filter those out. You can see the ortho image which shows the cloud. We've got a black and white image there that shows a quality layer which we provide with the data, which highlights any features that were there were problems with extraction, sometimes where there's correlation issues, or largely it's used to highlight where there are cloud areas. We didn't have any cloud on this data, so it wasn't an issue, but it's just another layer that is included as standard. And then the final layer, you can see there is the contours. And those are typically provided at 1 meter interval with this type of data, but depending on the land cover, it could be that a 2 meter contour might be more preferable, and in some cases on the other side, 0.5 meter or better may also be something that better suits the requirements. So we can tailor that to suit those features. So the initial DEM output is then checked, errors are isolated, then corrected and validated together. We can convert the surface model to a DTM if that's part of the process, and then provide those additional layers. Kevin has very helpfully kind of gone through some of this process anyway, but I just wanted to show some examples of how that process worked for us and how we used it for this example. You may see a difference in terms of the orientation of what I'm showing on this screen to what I'll then subsequently show on other screens. This is just the nature of the primary data set that we're working with, which means that it's not in a kind of map-oriented view at this stage, but the RPC data, the rational polynomial coefficient data, is used as part of the model building process to correct the data and make sure that's all aligned with the time points. So whilst you can incorporate ground control, as I said, we don't do that within PCI, but it can be done in there if you prefer to do so. So we typically select high points. You should be able to see a series of kind of blue dots with some squiggly numbers which you may not be able to make out on the screen. For this type of data, you often don't need that many points. Pleiad, similar to the digital globe satellites, has very good positional accuracy without ground control, so you don't need to have too many points in there to get a good correlation between the two data sets, between the two stereo pairs, sorry. So you normally use 5, maybe 6 tie points in this case to extract the features. The pop-up window that you can also see there highlights the residual error. So we're seeing residual errors in terms of these tie points between the two images of 27 centimeters in this case, as a maximum. In some cases they are much better. So once we've put our tie points in, we're happy with the residuals, we can calculate the model and develop the output DEMs. So this was done, we've got 2 halves of the DEM, so we're running 2 separate elevation products at this stage between the 2 dates, the March and the December imagery. Sorry, March and February. I think my previous slide said December. It should be March and February, much closer in date. So what we then get as an output are 2 elevation products. These are completely uncorrected at this stage. We haven't done any artifact correction. We haven't checked the data. This is how it has come out of PCI. So we then take that into our software. We can look at the 2 data sets. We obviously need to join them together at some stage. Typically we do that sooner rather than later because that then allows the next stage of process to be more consistent across both halves of the DEM in this case. You can already start to see, I hope, some kind of darker purple areas. These are the mine pits, so you can see they're quite well spread across the area. So what we do to join the 2 data sets together is to look for the overlap between the 2 and measure the offset in terms of the difference. The reason that there might be an offset is we typically, although it can be done, we don't typically use a reference DEM as part of the elevation process. We tend to to base it just on tie points and the correlation, and then use the difference between that to map them together, because we're then going to correct it to ground control anyway, so we don't need to have a reference DEM at this stage. Particularly with this quality of data, it's not normally necessary. We've certainly not found it to be. So in this case, I've also pulled up, you can see a white line on the image, I've pulled up the slope of the difference between the elevations of the two data sets. You'll see that there's a gap, obviously, because there's a difference in overlap. And we've got perhaps 3 meters or so offset between the two data sets. This isn't uncommon, and this is very easy to kind of fix, and it's normally very consistent and systematic across the data. So we can then offset the DEM to itself and then generate one single mosaic product from that. So then on the screen, hopefully you can now see one complete DEM. So this is a consistent DEM across the whole area, which has no gaps. It's not split into two halves anymore, and we've flattened that, or topographically flattened that what was that 3 meter step between those two different areas. So what now we've done the DSM mosaicing. Before we can, I guess, complete the DSM, there are other things that we need to do in terms of correction. So as an output to the DSM, we want to make sure that there are no artifacts in the data. With this particular output, we're quite lucky that there doesn't appear to be any specific artifacts, but we do have some mine pit areas which are quite noisy, so we're going to take a look at those next. So we're going back into PCI. Kevin has already highlighted some of the tools available in terms of DEM editing, and these are the exact tools that we would use here in terms of flattening out or filtering some of these features. In this example, I'll show a couple of pre and posts. What you can see on the screen now is an area where that mine feature has been, the bottom of the mine pit has been flattened. Okay, sorry. Just checking everyone could hear me. So where that area has been flattened, you can still see some bobbly areas around. These are small shrubs and features. So at this stage, this is a DSM. We'd expect those features to be in there. And we can use the tools, as Kevin has identified, draw around a polygon, and there are a series of different filters that can be used, and they could be to remove bumps, to remove pits and spikes, and can be used to help to filter out some of the trees, as well as then flattening areas. What we've done in this case, and what we do for the mine pits, is to draw as closely round to the edge of where the noisy areas are, and then flatten that to a constant level. In essence, that information isn't what the client is after, but it makes it look more aesthetically pleasing than it does if it's all very noisy at the bottom. So just to show a couple of examples of where that's been applied. So on the screen now you should see 2 small mine pits, but they're also quite noisy, and which will become hopefully more obvious when hopefully you've seen that wipe across. I'll just do that again, and you can see those features have been flattened to a constant level. So we've removed that feature, very easy. It takes a few seconds to do in each case, and then the DEM can be saved as a separate layer or saved over itself as well, if that makes the repeat file size better. And likewise in another area, you can see the mine pit there. It's quite obvious. It's not as extensive in terms of the artifacts. We've got lots of trees around there. There's also lots of buildings. There is a small town to the east of this particular extract. But we also see some very noisy areas associated with the water, the extraction lakes that you've also got on the scene as well. So but we can flatten those using the same type of technique and just providing a more consistent data set. This improves the quality of the visual output, but also it's unnecessary to have so much noisy information in those areas, and it will only go to make for a very, very noisy contour area. And if you're looking at an area in 3D, you want to try and minimize some of those very high spikes or pits that aren't going to actually provide you any useful information. So we apply that same method over the whole area, and through the series of different mine pits and small water bodies. There's no actual lakes features in the area. They are just the kind of mine lakes, that storage ponds that are there that we're flattening in those cases, and that's mainly because the correlation over water with stereo is very limited, if at all, and it's pretty much always that you'd lose coherence over those two areas. So that's why we have to flatten those areas. They can be left in some cases. You get lucky and you can get a good response, but largely a little bit of flattering or filtering provides a much better result. So once we've done that from a DSM perspective, that's complete. It's complete and then ready to go to kind of ground control verification. So we put that to one side, but we use a copy of that to generate the DTM. So here we're very much focused on removing the tall vegetation and any trees, whilst also retaining the topography on what is largely not very high variability in topography, which makes it a little bit harder because you don't want to degrade the area too much and then lose the quality of the relief in the area as well. Particularly when it's being used in a kind of more engineering exploration way for planning and logistics. So what we can use here, there are tools within PCI again which convert from DSM to DTM. There are several different ways you can do this. There is the tool that you're seeing on the screen now, but you can also use some of the editing tools. Perhaps if your areas of vegetation or urban areas are smaller or perhaps less contiguous, you can use some of the filtering tools which will provide a similar result, and in some cases may provide a better result without degrading some of the topographic variation as well. So it really depends on what the area is like. In this case we were using the DSM to DTM module, which can be accessed through the algorithm librarian directly in Focus. In here you put in your input and then you set the parameters. You can see the parameter screen in front of you. There are a range of different parameters you don't have to set, but the one you do is the one that's in red, and that's the object size. So what is the size of the feature you want to remove? In this case we ran it through a range of different ones and built that process up. So we started with an object size of 10 and then increased that to show a progressive or cumulative change in terms of the filtering so that we could easily track back and edit and iterate as required to ensure we weren't removing any of the topography at the same time. And that process seemed to work pretty well here, and you can also change the terrain type as well to hilly, or there's mountainous and flat as well. So there are lots of different tools that in this case weren't used but can be used for some of those more complicated areas. So we're just going to look at the wider area just so you can see some of the variation. So it looks quite speckly. Hopefully you can see this on your screen. And then I will press the button and wait a couple of seconds, and hopefully you'll see some of those features are disappearing. So the mine areas itself, they've already been flattened, so they aren't changing in this case. So we're comparing the DSM that we've already generated to the newly generated DTM, which has filtered out those areas of tall vegetation. We can look at this a different way, where we compare the two. So we can see a black line on the left-hand image, and then the profile at the bottom is showing the comparison between the DSM, which is where the blue spikes are popping up, to the DTM, which is the red line. So there are still some spikes in there. Some of that will be around the edges of the drainage, of which there is quite a lot in this area. it becomes quite difficult to remove those without having too much of an implication on the morphology at the edge of the river channel as well. But we can see we're removing quite a lot of that taller vegetation as well, which is the main focus and purpose of what the client required. Just give that a second. So the next slide is ground control. Obviously this is a very important component of DEM generation. Typically for high resolution data sets, as in the ones that we've mentioned, so Pleiades, GeoEye, Worldview 1 to 3, the nominal accuracy without ground control in open areas is going to be in the region of 1 to 5 meters-ish. It really does depend on the area, but in that kind of range. If we've got ground control, typically the specification would be 0.5 meters to 2 meters, but again, that will vary, and often with the types of elevation model products that we have provided, we've nominally consistently been getting sub 1 meter, often 40 centimeters or so in terms of accuracy. But that very much does depend on the quality of the ground control, how well spread it is in the area, and also how visible it is. So this slide just kind of depicts that a little bit more before I start to talk about what we had available to us for this area. So ground control can be surveyed as part of the acquisition. And what I mean by that is that targets can be laid out. So the top image on the right-hand side you can see is a cross-like target. That has been laid out specifically on the ground and was laid out prior to the image acquisition. So that meant that the satellite can actually see that feature, which we can see in the second image down, the middle image. I've circled the very bright feature. This is the ground control point that was placed out specifically. So that's then measured by a DGPS, differential GPS, and its location is accurately noted so that we can then tie that into the image and use that as part of ground control. And we nominally select or ask the client to set up 20 to 30. Smaller areas we can do 10 or perhaps even a little bit less. But nominally 20 to 30 points just gives more redundancy and allows for a better correction. The data can also be, the survey data can also be collected after the imagery has been collected. So it could be that we can supply some suggestions to the client to go and survey specific areas or specific points that we think will be good. Normally that would be road intersections or other features that are away from buildings, away from tall vegetation, pylons and things which cause shadow, which are very difficult to resolve in elevation models. And we've done similar for the same client. We've done similar projects actually for the Kofi, the northern side, where we were also they did a survey following the image capture to improve the ground control and the accuracy. Or we can use existing control, which may come from a variety of sources. They could be from a variety of accuracy of data sets, and perhaps even from a number of different years of survey. We've had many projects that we have used this as an option instead, just because sometimes it is not feasible to get out into the field. Perhaps the area is very remote. The image on the very bottom is a good example of that, where we don't have very much in the way of physical human features on which to put ground control. So we're measuring the difference in distance between natural features, which could be distance away from a single bush, that's quite an isolated bush or tree or other feature. We can't be too close to that tree because we may not be able to get the correlation of the elevation, but if we can measure the exact distance and direction from the tree, then we can measure the point from that and use that as the marker. That has worked quite successfully in some of the areas where if there is no, if the area is devoid of such features, it's very difficult, of course, to then be able to find suitable control. But other control could be from benchmarks, leveling data. We've used drill collars. We've also used survey plan data sets as well as part of horizontal positioning. So it can be quite variable. Typically, I've put the specifications on the screen in terms of what we normally look for, but we can work with the client to try and optimize what they have. And if that's the data set that they're using to tie all of their data to in the various different packages they may use, then it makes sense to tie this data to that as well. So everything is working in the same type of system.
Just a quick question, Charlotte. What slide are you on? Because I'm seeing 19 right now.
19, yes, I'm on 19.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so the next slide, accuracy correction for this area. So what I've kind of plotted up here, so we should all be on slide 20, I hope, is the extent of the kind of range of data. What you'll see is a number of different green colored points, not to be confused with the green in the elevation on the eastern side of the area, but they're quite lumped together, lumps of different chunks of green. We also have some white lines as well, and these are the kind of CAD mine design drawings which we used for the horizontal positioning as well. What we actually had for this area, those green points that you can see, culminates in about 400 or so control points, which come from some from drill collars, some from surveys, some from checkpoints. And what we then had to do was kind of work with the client to try and find out the accuracy of those different variable products, checking the drill collars were surface and not either measured above or slightly below the ground as part of the drilling process, particularly given there's underground mining in this area. What we then did was filter out those points that are on features such as tailings dams, because we're aware that those features are changing. So having a control point of a date that we don't know means that where we might have some variability, it's not a useful point to have in those cases. And also removing some of the points that are on the very, very edges of the pit wall as well, where we know there is active excavation happening. So trying to keep those points to the open areas, of which we used a series of mainly the checkpoints, of which there were in the end about 10 points that we were using as the main control. We removed all the spurious points, those on tailings dams, as well as those on the edge of the mine pits. And our overall accuracy for those main points were 41 centimeters from the data. That extended to 81 centimeters when we used the rest of the data set to provide a kind of validation or check. So there is a bit of a variation. The client was aware that there were some differences in terms of the survey, so this wasn't a big surprise to them. Still comes within the error range as well, and they were happy with the procedure in terms of how we approach this. The systematic error is how the data has been corrected. We want this to be as close to zero as possible. For the most part it was, but there were some points that, because they were of the kind of higher accuracy on the random error side, we were getting some higher systematic errors than we normally expect. What we were then hoping to do, and I don't have a slide on this at this stage, is we were then hoping to be able to join this to their pre-existing elevation product in Kofi, which is to the northwest of this area. However, they have very different locally surveyed systems, and whilst we can generate a model to try and correct for that, it was trying to understand the differences between the two at this stage wasn't possible. So that's perhaps a later step that we can combine the two so they have one consistent data set for their licenses in this area. So overall, the client was very happy with the output. What you're seeing on the screen now is what SRTM looks like in this area. We're not seeing any mines because they weren't dug at this time. We can then look at the DSM that you'll see on your screen. It's fully corrected. The DTM, some subtle differences because the vegetation isn't actually that extensive here. And then the ortho image as well. So the ortho images combined again between the two different data sets. They were optimized in terms of overlap, pan sharpened, and generated a natural and false color output as well as part of their planning. So that's the end of that specific case study. As I say, the data set was provided, I'll just go back one slide, the data set was provided to the client in a range of different formats that allowed them to use them within their mining design software. So not just the traditional GeoTIFF and shapefile outputs in terms of raster and vector, but specifically CAD data sets, which we know is very common for mining and engineering software. And also ASCII data sets as well in preference to raster, which are very straightforward to produce. And that then gives them the information that they need to overlay with the other data, and we work then with the client if there's any issues. There haven't been in this case, thankfully, but if there are issues, then it's a kind of iterative consultation between the client to optimize those outputs, and that's something that we really do pride ourselves on in terms of providing that best solution. I just wanted to conclude with the last few slides in terms of how we use the DEMs, not just for that specific application of more visualization and logistics, where we're generating a DEM that the client is then using and taking further, but actually what we can do with the DEMs in-house, and how that can be useful for exploration, whether that be mining or oil and gas as well. So for the most part for geological mapping, we tend to use optical imagery, mainly because of the spectral separation between different lithologies makes that a lot easier than using any other data set. However, I'll show examples later of why we also use radar, or have to in some cases. And we use multispectral data from Landsat scale down to World V3 scale. So there is depending on the requirement of the project, will depend on what might be the most suitable data set. Then, most importantly in geological mapping is an elevation model. It is almost impossible to interpret geology without having an elevation model as well, because we don't get any perspective in terms of the structural controls or topography, which is vital to obviously understanding the differences in an area, and also the boundings between some of the different stratigraphy that might be visible. So this is vital. This could be from the SRTM level, or it could very well be, as we use a lot of the time, down to the 1 meter level as well. It really does depend whether we're looking at regional, basinal scale to very, very high detailed scale, depending on the project. So in this example, we've taken that data, we've shaded the multispectral data here with the elevation, so just to enhance some of the topography, makes it much easier sometimes than just looking at the image. And we then overlay the interpretation, which is done by our geologists. So we can extract features like the different fold structures, faults, thrusts, as well as dip features as well, which are extracted using kind of standard 3-point system approaches. The white lines that you should be able to see on the screen are the lithological boundaries, which are mapped based on what we can see in the multispectral imagery, what we can understand from the elevation product as well. And then we can style those according to how we understand the geology to be in the area. Often that's perhaps in reference to some of the lower resolution geological maps that might be available, but not always the case. But it does help to give an indication of the different ages of blocks, which then helps us to tie that in to what we're seeing. But in some cases, and hopefully you can see a screen that looks a little bit cloudy. In some cases the problem is we have a lot of cloud. Particularly in tropical areas, we do a lot of work in Southeast Asia, and we get a lot of cloud. So in those areas we would also use radar data. So for this exact same area that you're seeing now, we can use radar data and we get a completely different view of it. And radar data is particularly good for geological mapping because of the nature of how it's collected. It not only provides information on textual, to support textual analysis because of the nature of the backscatter response is reactive to the size of the features on the ground, but it also very much highlights the topography significantly more so than an optical image does by itself. That's not to say we would use one or the other. In some cases we might use both, with the optical as a reference where it's available. But in those tropical areas, we can start to pick out more features. It's a little bit more difficult to pick out the lithology with just a radar data set. However, what you can do based on the differences in texture, as well as again looking at the topographic controls, you can certainly map out the structures with much more ease. Use optical where it's available to help to guide some of the lithological extraction. So I'll just scooch through. We've got the radar image you're looking at, and then the shading for the elevation. Color shaded elevation. And then as we go through, you'll see it populating on your screen, the different faults that we can extract. These are all manually interpreted faults from our structural geologists that we have at NPA. We also have the dips as well. They're measured where they can be from the elevation model. Depending on the scale, the higher resolution elevation model we have, the more detail we can obviously get from the dips, but for some of the regional scale geological mapping projects, it's not feasible to perhaps have a very, very large high resolution DEM, so we use the best that's available to support that. And then the lithological layer as well on top of that. And there's a quick zoom in as well, which just shows some of those features. We can also see some of the drainage extraction as well, which is taken from the elevation model. And populating that with all the relevant attributes in association with the local geology there. Subsequently, we can also build cross-sections. This can be useful for a range of different applications. We do also, I should have mentioned, we do also do spectral mapping. I haven't included that within this presentation, focusing more on the kind of surface structural geology, but I can also provide some more information on that separately as needed. But the section building I thought was a useful way, particularly from an elevation model application perspective. So what we're looking at here is a fault propagation fold in the Zagros. We've got a false color aster image where we're seeing vegetation as red in this case. You can see a line across the center of the screen, which is where we're going to be slicing through the image to generate a cross-section. So if we overlay the interpretation, which you may remember we've previously seen, we're just looking at it in a 3D view in this case. Structural control is vital to be extracted from the elevation model to give us that topographical context, without which we're not going to be able to provide any kind of estimation of what the subsurface looks like. We use a software here called Midland Valley. It's a MOVE software. It's called MOVE, sorry, by Midland Valley. And that allows us to input a range of different data sets and view and edit those to meet the different requirements. It also allows us to build the cross-sections and scroll back in time to ensure that those cross-sections represent as fully as possible what we're seeing at the surface. So what a cross-section is doing in this case is giving an indication of the subsurface geology based on what we can see at the surface and extrapolating that down. So the importance of the elevation model in this sense is to be able to measure those dips dips of the topography accurately enough to start to understand how the subsurface geology might work. Where we have seismic information, which is possible, and certainly internally, if there's non-proprietary seismic, we may be able to include it. If the client has seismic data or well data, we can also include that into the analysis and build that into the cross-section to start to understand not only the subsurface structure, but that can also lead from an oil and gas side into potential prospectivity in some areas. So building those up, it's something we do quite frequently in these areas to understand what might be happening. We also use very high resolution elevation models, as well as high resolution data. So player data could be used in this case, as well as any of the other kind of half meter or so data sets to map fractures as well. Typically used on the more oil and gas side, but a very useful application of these high resolution DEMs. What we're looking at here is a fold in a rock, and we're mapping the fractures at a very high scale of around 1 to 500, 1 to 1000 mapping scale. The different colors representing different ages as well as different orientations of the fractures on the surface. What we can then do is to orient that in a 3D way, because we have the elevation model to be able to do so, and we can map how those change around the fold as well. If I skip on one slide, what we can generate is something we typically do for these types of studies is rose diagrams, where we can look at different areas, look at the orientation, and the dominance of the orientation of the fractures can give a good indication of the potential of an area, but also in understanding how the fold was formed. So understanding as much from what we can see at the surface as possible can provide significant information as to what might be happening at depth. And the same thing can be done with mining applications, where we're using high resolution data to do a geological interpretation supported by other data sets, and also then perhaps even integrating spectral data to provide some anomaly maps as well. So this data is never going to replace field survey, but it's there to help to understand what might be there, perhaps what areas would be useful to go and follow up, and certainly from the case study perspective, it's an indication and providing understanding over a wide area where they just don't have that type of detail of imagery available to them already. So my very last slide is just a very quick summary. So whilst we've only looked at one real example of, case example of data for high resolution stereo, there are a lot of different sources available, as Kevin and I have both talked about. Where we have high quality ground control, we can get some really good relative and absolute accuracies with the data set, but it really does depend on the quality of that, and we can work with the client to optimize that, and also provide suggestions of where might be places to go and survey or resurvey as appropriate. Elevation products are used in a range of different applications, as many of us will know. Typically in the kind of geological side, they have far-reaching applications for multi-layer data sets, but they're also very, very well used in environmental and engineering applications as well. So there's a lot of different scope for it, and there's a lot of very good technology out there to help generate them. So with that, I will say thank you very much for your time, and are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Charlotte. There are questions, but before we go there, I just want to do one more poll and point people to a few resources which they might find useful. The last poll is really a question to know if you'd like to continue the conversation. So, having seen today's presentation, would you like to discuss this further with either ourselves or CGG? As you saw, NPA Satellite Mapping is quite an experienced company with a lot of expertise for geological mapping, so maybe you're interested to speak with them about your particular project and perhaps engage them with their expertise to help you out in terms of services. And also, of course, if you'd like to learn more about we've had several questions about accuracies and types of data that could be used to extract DEMs and so on. So if you'd like to know more about that and what will and will not work in terms of achieving the accuracies you're after with PCI software, then you can for sure get in touch with us. So I'm going to close that down in a few seconds here. I'm just going to give a 3-second warning. So 3, 2, 1. And I'll close that down. So thanks everyone for giving us feedback on that. And I just want to quickly summarize a few things. So our title was wrong there, so I just want to throw that up here. So our title of our webinar was DEM and Mining Applications Case Study with NPA Satellite Mapping. Apologies for that mistake at the beginning there. And I just want to point you to a few things. So we have a number of resources available. I'll quickly browse through a couple of them. So we have our YouTube channel with many, many videos and specific playlists on the topic of DEMs. We have our support destination site, so you can essentially go to support.pcigeomatics.com and access tutorials and videos and discussion forum and many other things that can help you get going quickly. You can download a trial version of Geomatica just by going to getgeomatica.com, and there's many different stereo sample data sets available out there. One that I would point you to that's very easy to access is a tri-stereo pair over Melbourne, Australia, that's available through Airbus. So I'm just going to quickly open up my browser and show you some of these things. So the YouTube channel, as I mentioned, if you just head over to youtube.com/PCIGeomatics, you'll land on our YouTube channel, and you can go under playlists, and you can access different playlists. So for example, if you want to search anything to do with DEMs, you could just type in DEM here, and you'll get a video here on how to extract DEMs and different DEM editing tool videos. Some of that flattening that Charlotte was showing, we walk you through step by step how to do that in our software. The support subdomain is here, so I'll just make that a little bit bigger. So if you go to support.pcigeomatics.com, you can search for anything. So once again, I'll type DEM here and see what comes up. You can see that there's developer resources. There's some community discussion happening on DEM and some other things that are available here. So you can search that way. You can essentially access many resources through the support channel.
Sorry to interrupt you, Kevin, but we can't see your screen.
Well, that's not good. Oh, okay, well, okay, so I was showing YouTube, so this is the YouTube channel, and I was searching DEM, so you search DEM, and what else was I showing? I was showing the support site. Hopefully you can see my screen now. I think you do.
Yeah,
yep.
It's come up.
Yeah, so again, if you go to support.pcigeomatics.com and type in any topic that you're interested in, for example, DEM, you'll get access to many resources. And as I mentioned, the sample data, so this is the link that I provided in my PowerPoint. If you just search in your favorite search engine, Airbus stereo data sample, you'll land on this website, and you can go under Optical Imagery, Pleiades, and then Pleiades Tri-Stereo, and you can see that this is the Tri-Stereo data that you can just directly download there. So with this data and with the Geomatica software, you could essentially run through a few tutorials and start generating DEMs. So with that, I will open it for questions. We've had a few questions come in through the chat, so I will pull that up. I'm not sure if you're able to see that panel as well, Charlotte. You can certainly
Yes, yes, I can.
pick some out and address the ones you'd like to, if you would prefer.
I mean, I think some of them you have hopefully answered already through the chat, which is good. One of the people have commented about the ground control. They may not they may have posted that before they saw the inclusion of the ground control. But the reason that we don't add that at the start is just because that within our processing chain, it works better for us to include that later down the line. But of course, it can be included. PCI have the capabilities to add the ground control within that initial process, so it can certainly be done then.
Okay, great. Do you have information on vertical and horizontal accuracy? Have you written that up in any papers, or do you have good suggestions there on where people could go to get accuracy information?
It very much depends on the data set. I mean, I think lots of the satellite operators will have the specifications of their elevation products, because some it's important to note that some do provide their own. So Airbus do have their own Elevation 1 product, which is a 1 meter grid posting DEM. So you'll find lots of information on the Airbus website about the Elevation 1 and 4 meter product, which are both derived from Pleiad. Similarly, Digital Globe have high resolution elevation products as well, so there'll be information on their advanced elevation series. But what I was showing was what we do in-house. So we don't have any specific papers published. The reason for that being that for the most part the accuracy will vary depending on the data set that we have. So it's depending on the ground control, that we have available. So we don't have anything specific, but if there's a particular area you're interested in and we can provide some advice, we've worked in a number of different types of terrain, both denser vegetation and very, very high topography as well. Some of the areas of Ethiopia we've worked in have very extensive steep slopes that make it very, very difficult to find suitable ground control. But we'd certainly be able to help to advise further if anyone has something more specific on that.
Okay. There was another question relating to editing when you're performing the editing on the floor of the mine pits. How do you ensure that you don't destroy the elevation along the walls and and anywhere else?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's in some senses it's very difficult because where you have a very noisy bottom part of the mine, it's sometimes not always very obvious where that point should be set to. What we typically do, and certainly the mines in this case were very easy to, because of the way they're stepped, we could see that at that very, very bottom step, that's where most of the noise was coming from. So what we did was essentially draw around that noise and that very bottom level and set that to a consistent level, based on an average of the elevation around that rim. So we're then not degrading the elevation of any of those steps specifically, and we're flattening it to what is a best estimate of the depth at that point. As I mentioned, that wasn't the main focus of what the client was interested in, but I can quite appreciate in some cases being able to do that accurately would be more important, and that can be discussed in terms of optimizing the base to height ratio of the imagery. I think Kevin's very, very kindly in the background showing some a quick editing around a feature, around a lake feature to help to show how that can be done as well.
Yeah, what I was trying to show, I don't know if I'll be able to show it here, but we have two ways of applying a filtering. So we can apply a filter within the polygon, but then if we have an overlapping polygon, we can choose to not apply with overwrite. So for example, if I choose this one and I do, let's say, constant elevation and apply that, you can see that it did not apply it where that polygon was located, where the overlap is. Whereas if I apply with overwrite, it will ignore that polygon. So you could use this functionality to preserve the walls and make sure that you're not destroying elevation into other areas. Okay, another question. I'm not sure if you see another one, Charlotte, that you'd like to address.
Yeah, there's one. There's a couple actually that have just come in, as far as I can see, related to viewing angles or stereo data. What are the best ones? Again, this varies depending on what you're focusing on. It may seem like a silly thing to say, but where you have more flatter topography, you want to optimize viewing angles in a different way than if you have very steep topography, mainly because you want to reduce as much as possible the shadowing that you might get. Because of course, if you've only got 2 images and you've got shadowing, you'll get occlusion and therefore more artifacts and in very steep terrain. Obviously, that would be quite common. So it will vary. It will vary. Sometimes you want to have the angles as actually quite close together in terms of base to height ratio, and sometimes you'd want them further apart depending on what your focus is. Further more in his question, they're asking about accuracy of the DEM across different land covers. Within PCI, it's not really a PCI question, that is. It's more depends on the data and depends on the quality of the ground control you might have. The correlation between the data itself is what gives you the what allows you to extract the features and minimize the artifacts. So we've had it will be a combination of the two. It won't be a PCI processing issue per se. It's going to be more down to the data. But the final point in terms of accuracy of DEM within PCI compared to previous versions, again, I wouldn't say that's a PCI directly. However, in terms of the output processing quality is significantly improved with the most recent PCI. They've made some significant changes in terms of some of the existing bugs that you get in software, but also some of the new tools and some enhanced technology that they've put into the processing workflow that does provide a significantly enhanced product than the 2015 or 2014 or even earlier versions of PCI from what we've certainly experienced.
Great. Okay, well, we're about an hour and 20 minutes into the webinar, and I think it's been a really good session. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for being our guest today. It was a pleasure to have you on our webinar.
No problem.
And I would like to thank all of the attendees for making the time. And if you have any specific questions that you'd like to follow up on, please send us an email, marketing@pcigeomatics.com. And we didn't provide Charlotte's email, but we'll make, if you get in touch with us, we'll make sure to forward it along. So thanks everyone for your time, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks very much, everyone.